Okay, we are live.
We are.
Welcome to the show. We are the Mentionables, and you are watching this live. Well, if you're watching it now. If you're watching it later, then I can't tell you when you're watching it. So tonight, I have with us, down here diagonally from me, the one and only
Joel Furches.
Yeah, that's you. And then right below me here,
Clinton Wilcox.
And then over this direction.
Hey, Maverick Christian.
Welcome to the show, guys. Glad to have y'all. And, I've got to say, before we kind of get rolling with our topic tonight, we have a very, very special announcement that...
Who's pregnant?
Hmm?
Who's pregnant?
Not me.
All right.
Actually, though, it's good you brought this up because it's a wonderful happy 21st birthday to Clinton Wilcox.
Oh.
So happy birthday, sir.
Yeah, so be sure to buy me plenty of booze because, I've never drank before in my entire life.
Yeah, well. And you're spending your 21st with us. That's great.
That's true. Yeah. I wish I still looked 21.
Oh,
don't we all?
You're 21.
Okay, all right. Well, that works for me then.
All right. So tonight I'm going to turn the wheel over to Joel, and he's going to guide us through our topic for the night. So take it away, Joel.
All right. Never had the wheel before. Oh boy. My own little podcast.
Don't worry. This is like one of those driver's ed cars. So if you go veering off down a road too crazy, I can just put the brakes or the mute on you and pull it back.
Either that or we can just ask Jesus to take the wheel.
We could do that too.
What kind of thing around here?
Right.
All right. So tonight I'm talking about atheism as an explanatory fiction. And I really have to unpack that for you because it seems kind of, I don't know, insulting, just the way it's put. So in order to unpack that, I'm going to have to walk you into the field of behavior analysis for a bit. So imagine that your wife pulls into the driveway, right? And suddenly the dog inside of the house starts barking and pawing at the door. And then your wife walks in and the dog's all over her. So you might describe the situation by a chain of cause and effect, right? So you would say that the dog heard the car. Then the dog got excited. And then the dog started jumping around. And you could do the same thing with, say, like a kid who drops her ice cream and starts crying. She dropped the cone. She started crying. Let's call that a 3-link chain. We've got the antecedent, the triggering event, the thing that happened first. And then we've got a mental response. And then we have the behavior that's caused by the mental response. So in my field of behavior analysis, we would ask, why do we need that middle link in the chain? I mean, instead of saying the dog heard the car, got excited, and started running around, the dog heard the car and started running around. Or instead of she dropped her cone, she felt sad and she started crying, why not say she dropped her cone and she started crying? We can't observe excitement or sadness. But wait, you say, we can observe sadness. That poor little girl was bawling her eyes out. Clearly, she's sad. Okay, so what that tells me is that she is crying because she is sad, and we're crying. We're using the behavior in order to infer the cause of that behavior. And we can only tell the cause of the behavior by the behavior that it's causing. So it's kind of a circular reasoning. This may not sound like the kind of friendly, warm, cuddly psychology that you're used to, which is very much concerned with your feelings. But that's because my field is a whole new ball game, baby. We say that feelings are as feelings do. We don't need the behaviors associated with those feelings. We just need to see the physical event in the real world that leads to those responses. So this is what we call in our field explanatory fictions, things like sadness and excitement, meaning they're labels that we give to broad categories of human behavior, as if the label itself explains the behavior. All right, so that's where we stand in terms of behaviors to that, folks. No.
All right, we lost you just a little bit on that last statement you made.
I was just asking to see what your thoughts are on this idea of getting rid of the sort of mental process and just going from, antecedent to behavior.
Seems a bit incomplete if you're talking psychology, but yeah. I mean, I know there are different schools of psychology. Behaviorism is one of them. That sounds a bit similar to that.
This is behaviorism.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. I'm in the field of behavior analysis.
Okay. I just didn't think behaviorism was that popular anymore. I mean, it wasn't B.F. Skinner's day. I guess that wasn't the impression I got when I took psychology in college.
Well, behaviorism is not popular. It's not pop. So the thing that's amazing about pop psychology is that you can sort of paint these taboos of invisible worlds that are going on inside of the human mind and, kind of tie that into things like philosophy and the self and so forth. But in terms of, actual utility, behaviorism is still very much a practicable field. In fact, it's probably one of the most growing fields, especially in the face of things like which is where it's it's put to full effect because we do early interventions with children that have autism to try to help them develop those skills that they otherwise wouldn't through these behavior therapies. But I'm bringing this up not necessarily to talk about behaviorism as a field of psychology, but to talk specifically about the concept of explanatory fiction, meaning that we can explain behavioral mental processes. And I need you to understand what that term means before I dive in and connect it to atheism. So would you buy into the explanatory fiction thing, or you're still pretty hung up on the idea of feelings and emotions and mental processes?
Well, I mean, I think I have pretty good reason to believe that feelings and emotions are real.
All right. I'm going to try to, so we're not having that issue.
What was that?
I said I'm trying to adjust my internet connection here so we're not having this issue. If I'm going to be the one talking, we should probably not have that problem.
Yeah, it'll be like, the first 15 seconds of what you say, it just kind of fades off and then it'll pop back in. So,
yeah, I edit the audio to these, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
So then what does the term explanatory fiction actually refer to? Does it refer to that second step that we don't necessarily need? Is that the explanatory fiction, or does it refer to something else?
I think Joel cut out again.
Oh, did you?
He looks frozen now entirely. I love this part in the show when Joel's face just completely freezes up.
Oh.
Here he comes. Maybe he'll come back.
Maybe.
There he is.
Yeah, that was a necessary part of switching to a different server. Hopefully this will be a little more smooth.
Did you hear my question, Joel, or should I re-ask it?
No, I heard your question. So explanatory fiction, basically, it's the idea that I can explain why a person would cry when they drop their ice cream cone without appealing to some kind of invisible mental process that I can't see. I can explain that behavior. I can explain how they learn to do that and, the consequences that have brought about that behavior without having to look into their head and, try to estimate things that are going on in there, and even when a person reports their feelings, the very act of reporting the feelings is based on a learned history of, if I do this, then it's because I feel that way. And so we appeal to a lot of these processes that we don't have any way of testing. So explanatory fiction essentially means that we can talk a lot about what's going on inside of your head, but we're using labels to things that we can't quantify. So there is a online atheist that you and I both know who will frequently ask the question of how confident are you that XYZ, and that always seemed bizarre to me because he's asking me to quantify my confidence, which is a very inaccurate measure at best. So, but that's the idea, can you quantify confidence? So yeah, explanatory fictions. That's what that is.
Okay.
All right. So let's move on and connect that to the topic at hand. In order to do that, I want to talk about this redefinition of the concept of atheism, which has happened over the last 40 years or so. You guys know what the redefinition I'm talking about is? No?
I just lack a belief in God.
Oh, you're talking
There
about
you
the
go.
redefinition of atheism. Okay, yeah. Where it's moved from a positive claim that there is no God into an agnostic claim that we can't know if there's a God, but we should live as if there isn't one.
Yeah, well, don't call them agnostic about it. They're soft atheists.
I'm sorry?
They're soft atheists.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Functionally, it's indistinguishable from agnosticism.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that a little bit. All right. Yeah, way back in the day, we would say that atheism is the position that God doesn't exist. Theism, without God.
Right.
But within living memory, the definition has been retooled to be that it's this lack of belief in God. So the redefinition comes about through a number of reasons. So one of these is that if you're going to go through to the bother of saying that you don't believe in God, someone might try to challenge that notion, and you would have to explain why you don't believe in God. But if you can say that you just don't have beliefs regarding God, this is closer to pleading ignorance. It's this idea that you don't require any sort of God concept to understand or operate in the world. And I don't have the need, if I'm an atheist, for a notion of God, and so that this is not a concept that I should explore, and certainly not a concept that I need someone to force upon me. And when it comes to a point that you can look out at the universe and be perfectly happy understanding what you can see without have some missing fifth dimension, the concept of God ceases to have any sort of meaning. This position is that, primitive man looked out at the mystery of the universe and invented some kind of invisible agent to explain how everything hung together. But the more we discover the practical ways in which everything functions and hangs together without any agency, this God entity recedes in his explanatory power. And eventually, we would be able to explain everything without him, such that the word God ceases to have any meaning because he's not the cause of war, thunder, floods, love, death, and so on. At some point, the word God doesn't mean anything anymore. It's kind of like the word
verificationism.
What's that?
Sounds a bit like verificationism.
I'm explaining that position. I'm not endorsing that position.
I know. I'm also for verificationism is for our lovely viewers out there. There's something called the verifiability criterion of meaning, where something isn't even meaningful unless you can empirically test it or it's analytic, like basically true by definition, like 2 + 2 = 4, or all bachelors are unmarried. Mm-hmm. The verification was discarded long, long ago, before any of us here were born, by the vast majority of philosophers when it was found to have serious issues. But yeah, moving right along.
Does that Does that ever come up in your conversations with atheists?
No, it's pretty rare. I mean, there's hardly any verificationists nowadays. Even internet atheists seem to more or less recognize that they're probably not philosophically educated anyway. Most of the online ones. Not all of us have formal training in philosophy, after all.
Well, there's this quote that you occasionally see floating around from Neil deGrasse Tyson and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and basically he says that the God is this sort of ever receding pocket in the universe as we, begin to understand everything, and that's essentially the same point that I just made.
Oh, well, sort of. So the idea. So there's a difference between we don't have any good reason to believe in God and like God of the gaps and so forth, and that the word God doesn't even mean anything. That would be what the verification would say, is that if you can't empirically test it or it's analytic, it doesn't even mean anything. So it went really the extra mile.
All right. Well, in this case, it's kind of like the word ether, which was once this theoretical element that filled the space between the stars and planets. But then we found out that what's filling that space was vacuum and exotic radiation, and the word ether has no meaning anymore because it's no longer needed as an explanation.
Well, I mean, ether has meaning; it's just not believed to be true.
Well, then you have this, word God, and you bring it up around an atheist, and he or she might decide to get cute and say, which god? Is it Zeus, Astaroth, Odin, Osiris? And it's this idea that the word God is a meaningless term that people have applied to any sort of label used to explain natural phenomena.
I'm not sure they'd say meaningless, because I mean, if for the conventionally defined atheists, they say there is no God, and for them to hold that belief, the word God would have to mean something. So if they say there are no gods, then they could be meaningless without meaning. I mean, maybe you're speaking metaphorically when you say not meaning. I'm taking you literally.
All right. Well, labeling, I suppose. What does the label God apply to?
It would lack a reference or a referent, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's like Santa Claus. It means something, but doesn't have a referent.
Well, anyway, atheism is not the assertion that God doesn't exist. It's the assertion that I have no beliefs concerning God. So the first thing I would start with is, if an atheist asked me which God and then lists off a bunch of deities, my response would be, which one of those do you believe in? And you've got this whole one God further line. But this is sort of the exact point. When I use the term God, the definition I apply to that term does not fit any of those entities. They just aren't gods in my sense of the term, in much the same way that alchemy, astrology, and crystal healing are not science by my definition. But if you say you lack belief, you don't have to bother with definitions. That's the other guy's problem. But this is where we get around to explanatory fictions, in the psychological sense of the term. I could accept that some bikers bar hopping around the country, or some nerd locked in his mother's basement building an obscenely large model train set. I'm sorry, Clinton, no offense. Or even a quantum physicist spending all his waking hours in front of a wakeboard probably lacks belief in God, because this is a subject with which they don't concern themselves. The focus of their lives are probably so far removed from church and theology proper that if they said they really didn't have much of an opinion on the matter, I would believe them. But someone who has gone to the trouble of labeling themselves an atheist has put at least enough effort into theology to intentionally reject it. And this is the difference between not accepting and rejecting. Those individuals who are so far distracted or removed from religion that they don't give any consideration to it have not accepted. But the atheist who labels himself an atheist has rejected it. Okay, we lost Clinton.
Yeah, he disappeared a moment ago.
Okay.
Hopefully he'll be back.
I hope so too. Maybe he got tired of my voice.
Possibly.
Well, anyway, the motivation they claim is simply a report of a mental state, not having beliefs. Now, the idea that behaviors are motivated out of beliefs is weedy enough, given that the only way we would have to measure your beliefs are the resultant behaviors. For instance, I could say you believe in God because you pray to him, and you pray because you believe in him. Or we could look for a real world cause of your prayer behavior, possibly because it's been reinforced in some way. But to say that talking about atheism or reading about atheism and arguing against religion is due to the absence of a mental state seems a little far flung. I will accept for the sake of argument that people are born without God beliefs. But once that baby grows up, calls herself an atheist, and begins arguing against religion, I think we can assume that something has changed in terms of that person's relationship with the notion of God since they were a baby. Here's what I'll say. I haven't studied atheists who were never religious enough to make any sort of categorical statements about them. But I do know about former Christians who are now atheist. And what I can say is that it was never the concept of God that this person rejected. It was the religious system itself. God was just the baggage that came with the system and that was consequently discarded with the system. And I'm ready for that YouTube clip that I sent you, Caleb.
You couldn't hear me there because I was muted. All right, here we go.
As atheists, we sometimes treat the concept of God as if it has a silver bullet, as if there's just one problem with the idea of God that we can point out that will destroy it altogether as a valid concept. Even atheists who are former and deconverted Christians make this mistake, because there is often one concept about God that dealt the final blow to their belief and brought them to disbelief. But this is probably actually an illusion, and they've probably just forgotten the earlier concepts. So, you may be surprised to hear that I hope to give the concept of God the respect it deserves. I learned a long time ago that you'll never cause someone to see your perspective unless you show them that you understand their perspective. And I want to give the concept of God its fullest and most respectful treatment before showing why I stopped believing it. In the mind of any sophisticated believer, the concept of God is a mega belief. It's a belief that's held together by many small beliefs, many small experiences that accumulate and form a larger belief. If at any one time one of these beliefs is attacked, a believer can still, in their own mind, rely on the strength of the other beliefs. It's only when a sufficient number of these beliefs that form the mega belief are countered that a Christian will really start to question their faith. This is called graceful degradation. It's a concept in network theory where multiple nodes in a network can be knocked down, but the network as a whole can still stand up. For the purpose of continuing my story, I'll label these nodes. This is
Now, I just wanted to interject for just a second here, Joel. This sounds an awful lot like what you've discussed some in your research on deconversion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was a clip that was brought to my attention related to that. So,
okay, all right. Well, we will resume. I'm not sure how I feel about the new agey music vibe on this one, but I can live with it. All right.
It's a simplified model of the concept of God, but I think that it covers a sufficient number of different subjects to make my deconversion convincing. Here's a brief overview of each of these nodes. I may not cover all of them. The first is logical arguments. These arguments could have been presented by someone whom the believer perceives as a reputable authority. I myself was convinced by the arguments of Gerald Schroeder, who wrote The Science of God. Next is prayer. Prayer provides a basis for belief in God through the perception of answered prayer. Next is morality. God is seen as the source of morality for Christians. Without God, there can be no morals. Next, there is the beauty of creation, whether the universe or life itself. The complexity of our material reality is a testament to God in the eyes of Christians. Next is the Bible. The Bible is seen as the divine word of God, inspired by God. It's seen to have inherent wisdom. Next is the testimony of other Christians. Other Christians bolster our belief, both by providing an example and by providing numbers. This is also related to our own experience as Christians. We don't see how anyone could believe the way that we believe, with the passion and devotion and commitment that we believe, and become a non-Christian. It seems impossible. Finally, and most importantly for me, was my personal relationship with God and my personal experiences of God. How can you come to not believe in God after feeling that you have communicated with God Himself? Atheists on YouTube have covered almost all of these points individually. I'm going to show you now how all of them come together to affect the single coherent concept of God in a single person's life.
I think you could probably cut it at this point.
Okay. Oh, and John Jacob is back with us. Glad to have you back, sir.
Thank you. Sorry, it's my turn to have connectivity issues.
All right, so you missed our video clip here. So give us the 30-second version of what was explained in that video, Joel.
So essentially he was saying that, I'll put these in my terms, that the idea of God and Christianity is a belief map. So it's a network of ideas that are interconnected with one another. And these interconnections are supported by one another. So, for instance, most people come to believe in God because of authority. Somebody told them about God, or at least they come to believe in a particular God. because of that. Your parents told you, your pastor told you, or whatnot. There you go. There's the belief map. Now, so what he's saying is that if you were to disable each of those nodes on that belief map, the lines that are connected kind of disconnect and they're left stringing around. And after you've discredited enough of those nodes, the concept of God sort of disappears. And so this is part of a video series he does where he then attacks each of those nodes to try to, destroy the concept entirely.
Okay.
Does he strawman them in every other video quite the way he did here?
I have not watched the series. I watched this video because somebody brought it to my attention and it related to some of the work that I'd been doing. Now, in fairness to the deconversion case, in most of those instances, it would have been one of those nodes that got picked off that caused the whole thing to fall apart. Because in cases of deconversion, they tend to come from a background which requires a high level of confidence. And so, I call it compulsive certainty. Basically, you have to be certain about your belief. If you're not certain that if I die tonight, I'm going to be at the pearly gates, then you're not really, saved. You're not really in there. You've just got to be really confident and certain about the things you believe. And when that confidence is shaken, it's inconsistent with what you've been taught is the Christian life. If I'm not confident about my beliefs, I must not be a Christian. And, it goes from there. So his graceful degradation system, where he gradually picks apart each of those nodes, is, giving a lot of credit to the theists that he's talking to, because in most cases of deconversion, it's like one of those that gets picked apart. But the case that I'm making here is that at some point, the religious system itself becomes kind of an aversive system. It just becomes grating and uncomfortable for the person within the system. And so they first reject the institution, and then God is the baggage associated with that institution. They reject God because they didn't like the system that was teaching about God. But I'd like to spend the rest of this time talking about that video, and this is where you guys need to jump in.
Okay. Specifically just in regards to the video or in regards to...
let's wrap that up, in terms of what I was talking about, but we'll also talk about the video if possible. So essentially my point was, if you're going to define atheism as the lack of a particular mental state, you've essentially said nothing at that point. It just becomes it just becomes aesthetics at that point. It becomes sort of a
it becomes basically what you might call an unfalsifiable statement, because if you're just defining your, speaking from the viewpoint of logic, saying that I lack a belief in God is just a self-referential statement. It's a statement that you make about your own mental state, essentially. And so, there's nothing to argue against there. I'm not going to try and convince you that you don't believe in God, or that you do believe in God, because you just told me that you don't, so I should take you at face value. So there's nothing really there that I can argue about. It's the proposition God exists or God doesn't exist is a statement with a truth value that we can debate and bring up supporting arguments and evidence for. So if an atheist just tells me that they lack a belief in God, well, that basically allows them to get away with not having to intellectually defend their own beliefs, essentially.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the consequence of that is that my job as the theist is not to make a successful argument against what their position, because their position is that they don't have beliefs. And so, after I've presented my argument, all they have to do is say, I wasn't convinced by your argument, and, you've essentially lost. So that, and you actually see this actually happens. You make a case, they say, I wasn't convinced, and they win.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are atheists we could point to on YouTube who argue like that. What's his name? There's one in particular that has a lot of Christian academics, philosophers, and theologians on his YouTube channel. Totally blanking on his name.
It's not Pine Creek, is it?
No, not Pine Creek. I can picture him. He's been sharing a lot of memes about himself. He's pretty egotistical. Tom Jump.
That doesn't narrow it down.
Right, Tom Jump is who I was thinking of. That's how he argues. He'll basically just take the hyper skeptical position and then have you try and defend your position. And at the end of the day, he's not convinced, so he believes that he won the argument because you didn't convince him that God exists. So he's one that definitely argues like that.
One of my pet peeves with atheism is because we still have a lot of people using the old kind of somewhat traditional definition of atheism, that there is no God. I mean, that just the phrase atheism is true doesn't mean it is true that I lack belief in God. It means there is no God. And It sounds like what people want is like, well, we want a word that means not a theist. We want a word like that. We already have a word like that. It's called non-theism. It's been used in philosophy for years. It's a very nice, straightforward, unambiguous label. And so one of the things I hate about redefining atheism is that just from a pragmatic point, it's pointless. Why are you making the language more ambiguous? Just use non-theism. We already have a perfectly good word for that concept.
Well, I would say that it's for the reasons that I laid out at the beginning of this episode, that, you have to have this kind of idea that, it's this idea that belief is blind. It's essentially, belief is the same as faith, and faith means blind acceptance of something that you have no reasons for. And so when you say, atheist at this point, after they've redefined belief, should just say, I have no beliefs, full stop. And that's what it means to be an atheist, is to not have beliefs. You either know something or you don't know.
We have a word for that. It's like using the word literally to mean not literally. Why?
Yeah,
that literally drives me insane.
Right. Or flammable to mean inflammable.
Don't worry,
it's right, shut
inflammable. Up with that. We're perfectly safe.
Right.
All right.
Okay,
well,
the way your audio broke up on that, even more amusing.
To whom are you referring?
Wow. Maybe my system's having trouble because you guys are all breaking up a little bit.
Oh.
I think you are, because
right, can y'all hear me?
Great deal of audio pause between when I say something and when you respond.
Uh-oh.
Also, I'm hearing weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth behind you. Why didn't you warn us of that ahead of time?
Right.
Yeah, I know, right? That's why I'm trying to stay muted here. So, all right, so let's break down the video. Do you want me to go back through and kind of look at each area on the video as we kind of go through?
I'm cool with that. Clinton didn't even see it, so.
Right. Yeah, so I'm kind of going in blind here.
What about you, Maverick?
Looks like Caleb might be frozen.
I'm still alive, like Pearl Jam. Yeah, I'm good with seeing and commentating it some more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, while we wait for Caleb to unfreeze.
Undeniability of evolution. Oh, we need to get Mark here.
Okay, apparently it's just a night for internet connectivity issues because now my internet had trouble. So hopefully it's fixed now. So hopefully this will fix some of our problems.
All right.
All right. Well, finally back into our video. So
Well-
I'm gonna kind of go forward to where it kind of starts going into each individual node.
How long are these? About 5
Well, this
minutes
is the one
apiece?
this is the one we just watched
Oh, okay. Got it.
because you wanted to discuss that, right? And we
Yes.
have kind of each of these nodes here. So I'll just kind of play each clip from each node and we'll kind of discuss individually.
All right.
I'm not hearing any audio.
Uh-oh.
Neither.
All right, 1 second. That would probably be my fault here.
Well-oiled machine, folks. That's
I know, right?
Dimensionables.
Like this is fantastic. We haven't had this much trouble with audio and whatnot in a long time, but it's working because we've got more viewers than usual.
Oh, there we go.
Hey,
Well, I can just dispatch evolution right now with one slogan. If
one
evolution,
slogan
if evolution is true, why are there still monkeys? Checkmate, evolutionists.
and bananas.
Yeah, no, I'm being facetious in case anyone out there didn't recognize that.
So for what it's worth, I actually really liked what this guy said right here about building a bridge to other people's worldviews, and not being able to really, discuss somebody else's worldview unless you've kind of understood it from the other side at first. I think that's a really good point, and I think it's something people should take to heart.
See your perspective unless you show them that you understand their perspective. And I want to give the concept of God its fullest and most respectful treatment before showing why I stopped believing it. In the mind of any sophisticated believer, the concept of God is a mega belief. It's a belief that's held together and form a larger belief. If at any one time one of these beliefs is attacked, a number of these beliefs are countered, that a Christian will really start to question their faith. But the network as a whole has a number of different subjects to make my deconversion convincing. Here's a brief overview of each of these nodes. I may not cover all of them. The first is logical arguments. These arguments could have been presented by someone whom the believer perceives as a reputable authority. I myself was convinced by the arguments of Gerald Schroeder, who wrote The Science of God. Next is prayer.
All right, so logical arguments.
Well, I mean, a little hard to address those arguments unless you're familiar with the arguments presented in the book. I have never read that book, nor have I even heard of the author, so I couldn't begin to try and address the arguments.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the video he does on the logical arguments because, if you're approaching it from the apologetic aspect, so many, if not all, of the arguments that are brought up by apologists tend to fall within the realm of logic, or at the very least, use logic as a referent for the argument. I can't think of any argument I've ever heard which was illogical or non-logical. In order to make an argument, you have to somehow reference logic to a degree.
Well,
I think it'd be fallacious, I guess.
Yeah.
But he's probably talking about things like teleological, ontological, things like that.
Yeah, so it looks like in this particular book that's mentioned, one of the major arguments of the book is the Kalam, is a lot of where the particular book is focusing. because it's actually a Orthodox Jewish apologist versus a Christian apologist per se. Now, granted, arguments for the beginning could quite possibly be the same there, but
yeah. So then, of course, the question becomes, if you lose one logical argument, for example, if some atheistic thinker convinces you that the Kalam cosmological argument is illogical or not tenable or in some way not sound, then what about all the other arguments there are for God's existence? For example, for a Thomist doesn't even need the Kalam argument, because the Thomistic cosmological argument, that's usually called the cosmological argument, but I think that's Aquinas' first way is what they usually refer to as the cosmological argument, or it might be one of the other ones. But Aquinas' argument doesn't rely on the necessity that the universe had a beginning in time. So if you refute the Kalam argument, which argues, all things that begin to exist have a cause, the universe began to exist, the universe has a cause. Well, the Thomistic arguments don't rely on the universe having a cause. The universe could have existed eternally, and the Thomistic arguments still succeed. So, it really seems you need to do a lot more work than just allowing one of your arguments to be refuted and fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that could fall under the logical arguments if he's only addressing the cosmological argument. And I'm lumping Kalam under cosmological arguments in general. But yeah, he talks about being a mega belief, and if you take enough of those pins out and let the strings fall loose, eventually the idea of God dissolves, is the point he's making here. I would say that this is how the human mind works. And here I'm going to cross over into the other realms of psychology for you, Wade. Mentalism. I'm going to talk about beliefs and things like that. But yeah, no, I mean, you start out with a pin in the board, which is like your parents, for instance. They tell you a thing and there's your pin. And then you have some experience related to the thing they told you, and you can stretch the string over to that next pin in the board, and your beliefs start to form, kind of like a conspiracy theorist's cork board. And sometimes you have to pull a pin out because you find out that it's not where it's supposed to be, and the strings have to move around. And so this idea of a mega belief, which is a term that's new to me, is part of the human experience. All of the main worldviews that we hold rest upon a number of different experiences that we've had which relate to that. And so when we receive a new piece of information, we try to stick it into that web somewhere. And if it doesn't fit in the web at all, typically we just chuck it. But if it discredits something in that web, we have to pull a pin out, the strings hang loose, and we have to reconnect them and modify our beliefs accordingly. And so what he's talking about is somewhat consistent with what I know about human belief. Now, his method of sort of deconstructing the entire mega belief by pulling out each of those pins is, I don't know. I suppose I've seen atheists do that kind of thing before, but typically they tend to laser focus on one thing or just a few things.
So in his reference here to mega belief, do you think this differs in any way from what we would typically we would use as a worldview?
It almost seems like he's describing how we the reasons why we believe something. So there's all these factors that explain or reasons for why we believe. Because like was said earlier, at least initially when we believe in God, we just believe because other people tell us that God exists. Just like how do we know that atoms exist? Well, just other people tell us exist, and we kind of grow up with it. And I think it's correct that all these nodes, all these factors do play a role in why we maintain belief in God. Like prayer, for example. I mean, prayer is basically a sort of connection to God. If you sever that connection, I think you might be a little bit less likely to believe in him because you don't quite have that relationship as you once did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, in the deconversion studies I've done, what you find is that people come from a background where all the pins have to be in the exact same in those exact places. And if they have to adjust, that's problematic for the person. And, sometimes losing just one of those pins, it's a house of cards. You pull one card out and the rest sort of collapse as a result of that. And so, you see people go through a rescue attempt. And the rescue attempt could either be content rescue, where they have to remain a creationist in order for God to exist. The Bible has to completely be without error, and if all of those things are not completely true, then Christianity fails, and therefore God does not exist. And so, as a result, that kind of person tends to be attracted to apologetics for the purpose of supporting every individual belief that they hold, because they need to preserve all of those beliefs as is in order to continue to believe in God. And then there are those who are willing to compromise. And the ones who are willing to compromise typically do what I call leftward drift, where they start to become, for lack of a better word, more liberal in their beliefs, because that allows some flexibility theologically. The Bible doesn't have to be inerrant if you're liberal enough in your theology, and Jesus doesn't have to have risen from the dead if you're liberal enough, and you don't have to embrace a lot of these social conventions that are in the conservative church. So a lot of the problems that become objections disappear if you continue to drift towards the left, with the end result being universalism or something like that.
Or as we call it today, progressive Christianity.
Yeah. That too. Although I think even in progressive Christianity, universalism is the extreme.
Guess it depends on who you hear it from.
Fair enough.
All right, so shall we continue on with pin 2 here?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Prayer provides a basis for belief in God through the perception of answered prayer. Next is morality.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't say the perception of answered prayer. I mean, I kind of feel a little bit of closeness to God, even if my prayers are completely unanswered. I mean, even just saying the Lord's Prayer, silently in my mind, I feel there's a little bit of connection there, even if nothing is answered.
Yeah, and he addresses that like 3 pins on, the sort of personal connection idea. But yeah, no, you have this sort of intercessory prayer idea. And I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but one of the deconversion cases that I studied was this girl, and kind of prayer was the sticking point for her. And, she looked back upon her life as a Christian and saw that all the really big prayers that they prayed, like that somebody with cancer would get healed, didn't frequently get answered. And that the ones that did get answered were things like getting a good parking spot at the mall, or, something like that. And, she went back and thought back over her prayer life and realized that it looked exactly like it would have if she had been praying to a banana and not to a conscious being with power to have causality. And so at that point, prayer just became a scam to her, which is more or less the point he's making.
And I find this one interesting, because I think Christians, even amongst ourselves, take such wide-arching views on what prayer is. For some groups, prayer is literally always intercessory prayer. I'm thinking of more charismatic churches. And I think Maverick's closer to kind of a more biblical concept, in that it's more about the relational aspect of it, rather than just being exclusive intercessory prayer. And where you do see those answered is actually in countries where the gospel's just kind of coming to a widespreading. That's where we see most of the radically answered prayers, is in these kind of situations. Although I think if you polled Christians as well, in general, you're going to find that, at some point in their life, they've probably had some kind of prayer answered. And I think a lot of those would probably be significant in a way that would be quantifiably miraculous. It's not to say that, your prayer tomorrow for your parent to be healed of cancer is going to happen, because I think there's also a meaning within the miraculous. So answered prayers or miracles are also communicative. They usually have a message or a reason for occurring that is significant versus just happening all the time. And again, that would, completely throw the miraculous out the door if we're seeing these things happening constantly and all the time. But I think you can easily take one of these narrow perspectives and say, okay, well, I don't see this working. You got to look at the bigger picture. What does God intend by miracles? What does he intend by answered prayers? And not only what is the purpose of what I'm getting out of it, but what am I putting into it?
Yeah, I mean, prayer kind of falls along the whole personal experience line of things, because there's not much that I can pray about that then another person can come in and, verify that it was answered. And you have atheists say things like that. I've had one personally say to me that, pray tonight that the stars are going to line up and say that God was here, and I'll go out tomorrow and see, and we'll see if your God actually exists, kind of thing. Prayer does not work well as a measure of the existence of God beyond my personal experience. And so, the job of the atheist here would just be to undermine your personal experience in prayer. And, it would be similar to what this girl did when she said that, looking back over her prayer life, it was, about what you'd expect if you were praying to nothing at all in terms of the answered prayer. What I can say is that, we have done studies that talk where we see people who are in debilitating mental states, who have chronic mental illnesses that bring pain and inconvenience. And the ones that are, regularly involved in religious rituals, including prayer, tend to have far better mental health as related to their physical illness than those who aren't. So, it's not as if prayer doesn't have measurable effects, but you could write those off to the same kind of thing that you would get from regular meditation. It doesn't necessarily have to have a God involved in order to have those benefits.
All right. Let's check out morality.
God is seen as the source of morality for Christians. Without God, there can be no morals. Next.
You don't have anything to say on that, do you, Maverick?
Yes, for those viewers, I've been involved in the moral argument from God from time to time. I agree. If atheism is true, if there is no God, there's nothing morally wrong. That's because morality, when you think about it, a property like moral wrongness is very strange on atheism. Moral wrongness is an invisible, non-physical, and empirically undetectable. So why shouldn't the consistent atheist reject the existence of this invisible, non-physical thing that cannot be empirically detected if the atheist is to reject the existence of this invisible, non-physical deity that have allegedly not been empirically detected? So given atheism seems more likely that people's evolved belief in this moral wrongness stuff is likely to be delusion brought about by evolution to get us to behave in certain ways and help our species survive. That's what I would believe, certainly if I were an atheist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what his argument about that is, whether he's going to argue that morality can exist without God, or if he's just going to argue that there is no such thing as objective morality.
Are we going to go through his videos in the future, or?
That wouldn't be a bad idea, but not tonight.
Well, no, yeah, I didn't mean tonight. I just meant like this is kind of an introduction to his videos. We're going to go through his videos, and okay.
He's introducing his videos. It wouldn't be a bad idea for us to go through his videos, but that wasn't the plan up until just this moment.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add here per se.
Yeah, I think we're probably all in agreement there that the existence of God is necessary to ground objective morality.
And I hate to have to make this clarification every time I have this conversation with anybody ever. But in saying that, we don't mean that atheists can't be moral. That's not at all what we're saying. It's the grounding for morality that's found in God's existence.
Yeah, I forgot we have to make that disclaimer. It's amazing how much that straw man pops up. It's like, oh, you're saying we can't be good without God? Well, I'm an atheist. I'm a good person. It's like, no, we're not saying you can't be good without belief in God. We're saying we can't be good without God. Two different things.
I actually had that come up in a conversation about it in the past. And, I actually kind of turned the whole thing around with this friend I was talking to and said, well, no, that's kind of the point here. You are a good person. You do good things. You're not robbing the cash register every day or, overcharging people for, the coffee that you're selling them. That's the point is, you're making moral decisions despite the fact that you claim there's no basis for morality. And of course, with them, they actually did claim morals are entirely subjective. So, it's one of those things we can turn around in discussion sometimes, because the fact that we behave morally, whether or not we believe in objective morals, is something that's still present for 98% of people. Short of your Ted Bundys and Dennis Ryders.
One thing that I've seen sometimes for some atheists is that they claim to believe in morality, but they've redefined morality so that it's entirely descriptive. That's something I've seen a lot in practice. So it might be a good idea to define what we mean by morality. So there's a couple different types of oughts. Some oughts are entirely descriptive in nature. An example would be when, if you want to do well in school, you ought to study just means something like, as a matter of practical necessity, you need to study to do well in school. So some oughts are entirely descriptive. There are some oughts that prescribe in a way that is not purely descriptive, like someone saying you shouldn't torture infants. And, prescribing might be using that sort of ought, prescribing in a way that isn't purely descriptive. And so what an atheist could do is just redefine morality so that's purely descriptive. Like, when I say something is morally good, I mean that it benefits the species, it promotes well-being. Well, that's fine, but morality has a more ought component to it, like the fact that we ought to promote well-being or something like that. And without that important ought component, you really don't have morality in the normal sense of the term.
That's a good point too. I was reading The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt this week, and he very much did that in distinguishing morality as being either a group-driven morality or an individual-driven morality. So he really kind of did do just that in redefining it and not dealing with the oughts.
So, Caleb, maybe we should bring in the listeners to this as well. We're always asking for chatter, and now we've got it, and we're kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier, I want to point out we were still getting into our conversation, but we had one Isaac Anderson with us, who joined us tonight. He's still with us. I think he might have left, but if he's still there, I'd love to engage some more. Oh,
yeah,
great.
He says he's back down here.
All right, so wonderful. So yeah, earlier he made some comments, and this one I wanted to bring up at some point. So he said he's simply not convinced there is a God. He'd originally planned to major in theology, but changed to philosophy and musical studies. Just do not see any reason to believe.
Well, would you like me to compliment that?
pursuing a major in philosophy. That's my major.
Yeah. Good
And
deal.
musical studies was actually my major when I was going to college.
Now I can comment on that from
Well,
the
there
angle
you
of
go,
deconversion
Isaac. You
stuff.
found two mentors right here.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, Joe.
Yeah.
Hey, don't worry about it. I'm used to it. In my household, that's a sign of respect. I guess. I mean, anyways, so commenting on that from the deconversion studies perspective, most deconverts are tend to be very involved in the religious environment, and if you're not very involved, if you're sort of a pew cowboy, as it were, then your leaving of the church isn't much of a problem for you, and it's not much of a problem for the church because you aren't very involved in that community, and that community wasn't as important to you. And so I do see this quite a bit. People who have some sort of pseudo ministry, or they go to a Christian college or a seminary with the intent of pursuing their interest in Christianity, tend to be the ones that crash and burn the hardest. So yeah, I can't think of a deconversion story I've covered yet that hasn't involved somebody who was more involved in the church than not. So there's that. Now, as far as the didn't see any evidence, this is one of the more common complaints. I sat down and I didn't see the evidence. And it tends, there's a couple of things about this. Isaac went to seminary, or he was going to go to seminary, and this indicates that he was involved in some degree of religious education. One of the things that has been noted by scientists or psychologists or whoever that study deconversion is that the emphasis that Christian education places on honesty and the value of truth seeking can actually contribute sometimes to the deconversion, because these individuals who value truth seeking and honesty will adjust their views more readily when they don't see the kind of evidence that they're looking for, because they value the truth over personal comfort. And it is uncomfortable to have your views challenged. So there's that. And then as far as this idea of just wasn't enough evidence, this tends to be symptomatic of coming from a background where one has to have high confidence. So for instance, if I'm going to the Bible and I start having some doubts about the Jonah and the whale story, I'm going to have to look for some evidence that this could possibly be true, because if it's not, that's a component of my belief that I have to remove. And what's going to be next? Now I can't rely on other parts of the Bible. My confidence in the Bible has been degraded. And then as my confidence in the Bible has been degraded, I more easily give up other things in the Bible. And then I start looking for evidence to support the particular beliefs, kind of like this mega belief that this guy is trying to refer to. And so as I look for support for each of my beliefs and I can't find that kind of evidence that would bring the kind of certainty that I've been indoctrinated in, then I come up with this idea, hey, there's just no evidence for this. So from deconversion studies point of view, what he's saying there is actually fairly common and relates in those ways that I've just discussed.
As a sort of a tangent, but Isaac, congratulations on entering philosophy. And I would advise taking logic as soon as possible. Logic is very useful to other disciplines in philosophy, and it's logic. It should be taught in K through 12 education anyway. For some crazy reason, we don't.
That's a good point. I would agree with you there. So maybe Isaac will expand a little bit more on some of his story here, or let's say, all right, here we go. He just responded to us. I just don't think it's been demonstrated that morality is objective. I stand with Matt on morality for the most part. I did watch Lennox and Craig for a while. They kept me into believing.
Okay.
Oh, for morality is objective. I kind of have a blog article about that. It's a quick argument for moral objectivism. Basically goes like this. You start with the question, okay, do you believe there's anything morally wrong with torturing an infant just for fun? And most people would say, yeah. Right. Now, would it remain wrong if a baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with him? And if you say yes to that, well, then in that situation, in that scenario, we have something that's morally wrong, even when all human opinion says otherwise. In that case, you would have to believe in moral objectivism. And you can reject this argument, but you have to like bite the bullets. Like, is there nothing wrong with torturing infants? Or is it the case that there's nothing morally wrong with torturing infants as long as the baby torturer thought otherwise and killed everyone who disagreed with them? And you can replace all sorts of scenarios too. Like, imagine there's a homophobic bigot that likes to torture lesbians just because of their sexual orientation. Is there nothing wrong with this homophobic bigotry as long as this bigot thinks otherwise and kills or brainwashes everyone who disagrees with them? Is he no longer doing anything wrong torturing lesbians for their sexual orientation? And they say, hey, don't do that. And I say, okay, well, as a Christian, I believe that homophobic bigot is doing something morally wrong. It is homophobic bigotry, but do you believe otherwise? It's a really, or especially a weird position if that person is like liberal and you're conservative.
Hey, Wade, what's the word that you use to describe the oddness or strangeness of that? What was that word?
Oddness or strangeness of what? Oh, okay, I see what you're getting. Okay, so in morality, there's the argument from queerness. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, so
doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, that's from J.L. Mackie back in the 70s. So yeah, it's had different meanings back then in the mid 20th century.
Well, Joel's sure getting a kick out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why distinguishing what you mean by words is so important this day. And I think that's one of the things we've lost in communication a lot is people just don't define what they mean with a lot of the language they use.
Yeah, I also see that from morality. So the argument from queerness is an argument that Mackie used. He disbelieved in morality, and his idea was that morality is queer. And it's certainly true on atheism. Moral wrongness is queer. It's strange in a way to make it unlikely in the absence of God, because this invisible, non-physical stuff that's somehow attached to this actions, and we can't see it. We'd have to have a very strange moral sense to even know that it exists. I think he was right about that.
That argument in our conversation, I had asked you to define the word just because it sounded like you were using it as a technical word, like in a technical sense. So I asked you to define the impression. No, I was trying to see what the technical nature of the word that you were using was.
Yeah, it wasn't really technical.
Only now,
good old fashioned. Back in the mid 20th century, that's kind of what queer meant.
Sure, I get it.
Now I'm old enough to remember the 20th century.
Right. Yeah.
Whoa, bruh.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I'd want to know what Isaac means by it hasn't been demonstrated that morality is objective, because it's not something we can demonstrate through empirical observation or scientific investigation. But it is something like what Maverick Christian was doing. It's something we can demonstrate through argumentation. That if you believe some act is always wrong regardless of personal opinion, then morality is objective. And I'm sure there's always going to be something we can find that a person believes that would always be wrong. And if there's even one thing that's objectively wrong, then morality is objective.
Any other chatter we want to bring up?
Good. Oh, there we go. So, Mr. Kozenkov has asked about the Ben Watkins debate with Tyler, and how he grounded his morality in that debate.
Yeah, so I was the only one who was of this group that was present for that debate. And then I edited the audio of that and I relaunched it in our podcast. And I still don't remember a thing about it. I wasn't really paying attention at the time either. So
Yeah,
Well, I could play devil's advocate and kind of imagine how I would ground morality. I think I made him on this a while ago, but how I would, if I were an atheist moral objectivist, how I would say it, I would say that moral facts are just non-natural properties that just appear more or less inexplicably when the right natural properties appear. So when, suppose somebody steals a candy bar, well, then the moral wrongness, non-natural moral wrong property just kind of appears there. It's just there inexplicably. It's a brute fact. But then, of course, you still get all the same problems that I mentioned before. It's like you can believe that, but one, how do you know it exists? It seems if atheism is true, we don't have any good reason to believe that exists. We can't see it, we can't detect it. On theism, you can say that God designed our cognitive faculties in such a way that when they're functioning properly, we naturally intuit elementary moral truths, just like we naturally intuit elementary truths of logic and arithmetic, that these moral truths exist. But atheism, we don't really have anything. It seems like we don't have a good reason to believe they exist. And on atheism seems really, they're queer on atheism, seems unlikely they would exist. And so even if you could have some sort of logically non-contradictory idea for grounding morality, it just still doesn't seem very likely on atheism that is true.
And we've got Isaac continuing to interact. Isaac, we really appreciate you being here and interacting with us tonight. It's good to be able to interact and have this kind of active conversation with you here.
Fifth person in the conversation.
Yeah. So he said, I'm mixed. I can't say I've truly decided because I keep coming to a constant question with myself. I've been watching and reading into many arguments for atheism and Christianity. And then he said, why are you, and he corrected this and said, why are you convinced?
So for me, it's a number of reasons. One reason, surprise, is the argument for morality. And one way to look at it is this. Imagine there's a red button that if you press it, like, some innocent girl will die, but you'll be rewarded with $10 billion. Now, you can tell yourself that morality is an illusion and that, is this red? If I press this red button, I'll get all the stuff I wanted. But you ask are you really going to push that red button? Now, if you believe there's nothing morally right, there's nothing morally wrong, then sure, you can press it. But you ask yourself, ask yourself, do you really believe in that there's nothing wrong with pressing the red button? Go ahead and press it. But before you do, ask yourself if you really believe there's nothing really wrong. And I think about myself in that situation. It's like, yeah, there's just some part of reality transcending my opinion that says I shouldn't do this. And that intuitive recognition of that reality is part of the reason why I believe in God, is because I don't think that realm is likely to exist if God doesn't exist.
Plot twist: the person who dies when you push the button is you.
Oh. Saw it coming.
Yeah, that's there are other reasons. There are others.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the reason that I'm convinced is I was convinced before I ever started studying philosophy. There are a lot of things that happened when I was a kid that I won't really go into now, but it's kind of led to me coming to this conclusion that there are things that are right and wrong, and there are certain ways that you can treat people that are that is just wrong, and even if you have. Even if you're in a position of power over that person, it's still wrong to treat a person like that. And I have, events from my own life which have kind of given me a kind of have instilled that in me just by personal experience. And so, yeah, now that I've been studying philosophy and apologetics and theology, I have the argument for morality. I believe that God exists, and all these things. But for me, it happened way before I ever. Way before. Well, actually, I should probably amend that, because it did happen before I ever really started studying philosophy, but philosophy actually helped me come to terms with a lot of things too, and really helped set me straight on a lot of my views. And so I read a book by Boethius, which I think every philosophy student's probably read, The Consolation of Philosophy. And I actually have personal experience with how philosophy can be a consolation. So I could have actually written that book that Boethius did. Not as eloquent with the poetry in it, but I definitely understand where he's coming from there. So for me, even before I started studying philosophy, is really just a lot of events in my own personal life that kind of showed me that the way that I've been treated was wrong. And the only way for me to make sense of that is if morality is objective. That's why if someone is in a position of authority over someone and mistreats that person, it's still wrong to mistreat that person, even though there's that even though they have the means and they'll probably get away with it, it's still wrong to mistreat someone. So it's just a lot of personal experience for me.
Another factor for me, and this is back when I was in high school, when I started, it's like, okay, does God exist? There was just the existence of mathematical patterns imprinted into nature. So I was originally a computer science major. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science. And I was kind of interested in computer science early in high school too. And here's one way to look at it. Consider two conceivable universes. One universe is akin to a randomized hard drive where all the ones and zeros are randomly assigned and there's no meaningful pattern. It's a chaotic, jumbled mess, disorderly, unpredictable behavior at every moment. That's one conceivable way the universe could have been like a randomized hard drive. And the other one is a universe akin to a complex functioning program with a sophisticated mathematical algorithms directing behavior, like a universe with consistent mathematical patterns ubiquitously imprinted in nature via physical laws such that it makes physics almost ludicrously successful in predicting behavior. So examples include relativity and quantum mechanics. They're very precise, extremely successful. And the physical laws are akin to a program's mathematical algorithms, and that behavior is directed in an orderly and predictable fashion. Now, it seems to me that second universe, the one that's more akin to a hard drive with functioning programs on it, is more likely to occur if the universe was a product of design rather than number one. And so the fact that, to me, it's like, it's like if you're handed two hard drives, one is just, there's ones and zeros, no meaningful pattern. The other has a program on it. You're going to think that the program one was the product of design. Now, it could be that if you randomly assign ones and zeros, you're going to get all these meaningful mathematical patterns imprinted everywhere, but it's not very likely. It's more likely you're going to get a jumbled mess. And so for me, intuitively, the idea that there are all these mathematical patterns are printed everywhere, like it was made by a mathematician, for me, that was also helpful in thinking that theism was more likely than atheism.
So my turn?
Yeah, Joe.
This idea of being convinced, I'm not sure I think in those kinds of terms, because there's kind of an absolutism or, a level of certainty or confidence, which is conveyed in the word convinced. And I don't think in terms of confidence or in certainty or anything like that. This would be similar to saying, well, what has brought you to, why are you convinced that philosophy is interesting? It's interesting because I find it interesting. And the same is true of Christianity. I pursue Christianity because it is a thing that I desire to pursue. It is something that gives me satisfaction and purpose in life. And the more I pursue it, the more satisfying I find it. And so could I be convinced otherwise? I'm not really sure. I'm trying to get into a mindset where I am unconvinced. I don't know. As a person, I do not embrace a position that I have not studied adequate to the point where I can argue it. And most of the things that I do argue that I have studied are in the realm of Christianity. Now, I've studied both sides. You kind of have to if you're going to listen to this debate. And the ones that I can argue, the ones that I can support, the ones that are logical and convincing to, well, there I use the word. The side that I fall on, let's say, is the Christian side in each time. And I never find a thing within Christianity, a question against Christianity, that doesn't have a very interesting resolution. And I'm not saying a resolution that I kind of stretched for just to try to feel comfortable with a belief. When I'm challenged by these questions, I find that the response to these questions, the resolution on the Christian side, is far more interesting. It makes Christianity far more interesting to me than it was prior to addressing that challenge. So I don't know if I can say the word convinced, because I can't bring out one thing that said, oh yeah, this is absolutely it. It's a journey. It's a learning experience. It continues. I don't have a set of facts and beliefs that I stand on as, the essential things that I know and I do know and I will ever know. It always grows. It always expands. It's something I'm constantly discovering.
Well, now, when we talk about being convinced, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have 100% certainty, does it? Because, for example, when I say I'm convinced by something, like if I'm convinced that morality is objective, I'm not saying that I have 100% confidence that it is. I'm just saying that I have such I'm at least confident enough that I allow that belief to affect my life by trying to avoid things which are immoral and trying to do things which help make me a more virtuous person.
Well, Christianity is satisfying intellectually and morally, and in terms of value, in terms of self-actualization, at every turn, every important thing in life can be found within the Christian system. And I have yet to find an inconsistency so uncomfortable that I doubt that it is a workable worldview.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of along those same lines. I would put mine in more the terms of a cumulative case. So I'm open to pulling in new evidence. I'm open to finding out that I was wrong about something and removing that from this. It's more. I would put it in terms of probabilistic thinking, in terms of how I look at it. What's the most likely cause for what I see around me? Which worldview best explains reality? And that's why I spend a lot of time looking at other religions. I want to see if they line up with reality, if they explain things philosophically in a way that's coherent, if they explain the universe in a way that's scientifically coherent. All those things. So for me, it's a cumulative case, and I can get that by looking at other religions, looking at the evidence for Christianity, looking at the argument for atheism. So, in a nutshell, I think that's what it is.
Isn't Christianity anti-science?
Well, yeah, I mean,
sorry, just a small joke.
No, I mean, the cumulative case, every time I think, it's kind of like when people ask me what my favorite song is, or what my favorite album is, or movie, or whatever. I can't ever answer that question, because I'm always listening to new music and watching new movies and things, and every time I do, I find appreciation in something new. And so, the same thing is the case when somebody asks me, well, what's your favorite apologetics argument, or what's the thing that grounds your certainty in God, or whatnot. It's hard for me to answer, because it's ever changing. It's constantly morphing as I'm growing and learning. And when I say that, I find this argument convincing, 2 years down the road, my perspective on that particular argument has changed a great deal, and not necessarily for the worse. I've learned more. I've grown as a person. And so I have my beliefs in God, and my Christianity is dynamic. It's constantly changing. There's nothing static about it. And so it's difficult for me to say that this is the thing that convinced me. The process is what's convincing me. It works for me.
All right. So Isaac did follow up partway through and said that this was interesting. I simply see it as this. It is possible that a God exists, so we can agree on that statement. I would agree. I think we would all probably agree to that statement.
Yep. Here.
So
Although
we
I
didn't
don't
find
Point.
Right. Yeah, except I'm not sure what he is asking about. Have we watched some? I don't think he followed it up.
Yeah, we haven't gotten an answer to that yet, but him and Maverick have been having a conversation.
He's got another one where he talks about Sean Carroll.
Maverick guy.
Sean Carroll.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed Sean Carroll's debate with William Lane Craig. I thought Sean Carroll was one of Dr. Craig's better opponents, personally.
Capturing Christianity has a review of that debate that's worth watching if you watch the Sean Carroll, William Lane Craig debate.
All right, yeah, I just see that. My comments are coming in a little bit late here. All right, so to this I hold to Sean Carroll. We do not have many evidences that the universe was designed intelligently. You expect the start to be rational, but by who? It's up to us to look at the evidence and say.
That's quite a bit of evidence, I think, that the universe is designed intelligently. One of the fact is that science is even remotely as successful as it is at all. You know, like I said, conceivably, the predictions of science and physics didn't have to be as successful as they are, but they are ludicrously successful with incredible amounts of precision in predicting orderly, mathematical, structured behavior. We could have, easily conceived the universe, like I said, akin to the randomized hard drive, which is just a chaotic, jumbled mess with unpredictable behavior at every moment. But instead, we see mathematical patterns, consistent mathematical patterns, sophisticated ones, imprinted everywhere. So that, I think, is more indicative of design, just the fact that we can do science itself. And you have to remember that, why did people do science in the first place? Well, a lot of these people thought the universe was designed, and we could find evidence of this in nature, and lo and behold, we found all these mathematical patterns imprinted everywhere. I mean, I think it is a lot more likely to occur on design than on atheism. Then, of course, there's the fine-tuning argument. And I know you can try to explain that away with like the multiverse, but I mean, unless you have independent evidence of the multiverse, I mean, this is clearly an ad hoc explanation. And to see why, consider something we could call the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario. Imagine there's a meteor shower hits the moons in a way that says, yes, there is a designer. I fine-tuned the universe so that this meteor shower text would appear. And suppose that lo and behold, there are certain parameters of the universe, certain constant quantities that if they're altered even by just like more than a hair's breadth, this meteor shower text would not appear. You could say, well, that's okay. Clearly, this was a product of design. No, you know what also explains it? Multiverse. There's a bazillion universes, and so odds are we'd have, at least one universe that has this meteor shower text appear just by chance. Well, that's true. Multiverse does explain it, but it's not exactly the simplest explanation, is it? So unless you have independent evidence of the multiverse, you'd have to say that, this fine tuning that we observe, in this case, the fine tuning is for a life permitting universe, is clearly evidence for design.
So I think that one of the things that's convincing to me that the universe is intelligently designed is that the universe is intelligible. Many years ago, Caleb and I did an episode about the argument for God from Lovecraft, and the essential argument there is that chaos is not possible. Chaos is an impossibility. And my classic example of this that I have is, imagine that you open your sock drawer and all the socks are mismatched. They're thrown everywhere. Nothing's folded up. There's many socks that don't have matches. But then again, there's a drawer that contains socks. That drawer has some intentionality for there to be socks in there. And then the socks have some purpose. They go on feet. So as randomized and disorderly as it is, the whole thing has purpose and intent to it, even if it's got some disorganization involved in it. Albert Einstein was famous for saying that the most unintelligible thing about the universe is that it is intelligible. And this plays into one of the conversion stories that I studied. Sarah Salviander, which if you're looking for a Twitter feed to follow, I definitely recommend hers. She's an astrophysicist. And she was a convinced atheist who went to college. And one of the things that brought about her conversion was the fact that she's working with things like superstrings and things like this that shouldn't be intelligible to the human mind, and yet we could comprehend them. And the fact that the whole universe is so awesome and yet can be comprehended rationally and quantified and brought into these systems, the intelligibility of the universe speaks to its intelligence.
Have you guys ever watched Star Trek: The Next Generation?
What? What is this Star Trek of which you speak?
Yeah, there's an episode where Captain Picard was actually killed, and he meets Q in the afterlife, and yeah, the episode is called Tapestry. It's actually a really good episode.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's one of TNG's better episodes because it's not just about this goofy thing where Picard dies and meets Q as God, but it's actually a pretty deep episode about how the events of your life shape the way, shape the outcomes, the ultimate outcomes of it. And it's really, really interesting episode. But as soon as the teaser's over, you see the opening credits, the advertisements, and it comes back and Picard basically just says outright, you are not, I refuse to believe that you're a god. The universe is not so poorly designed.
Yeah, I remember that.
So there was a statement of intelligent design in Star Trek TNG, which I thought was cool. But
it's interesting because
I mean, like an actually intelligent design. You probably meant a little bit more metaphorically, but yeah.
Well, yeah.
So it's a great episode. Everybody watch that episode. It's one of the better ones.
Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry was an atheist, and it's very apparent because every third episode of the original Star Trek series, they meet a godlike entity that's just sort of malicious, and then they beat it through science.
Well,
and then the Next Generation starts that way.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily just that, though, because he did allow the writers of the show to explore various themes that he didn't necessarily agree with, because there was an episode where they met Apollo. And, Apollo was this godlike entity who the crew of the Enterprise discover the source of his power, and that he's not really a god, but he just has powers based on this device that he has. And basically, through the course of the episode, Apollo wants the crew of the Enterprise to worship him as a god. And Captain Kirk just says, mankind has no need for gods. We find the one quite sufficient.
Really?
Implying that he believes in God. So
I remember that episode. I remember he compared Spock to Pan.
Yeah, I think it was like the NBC censors or CBS censors or something must have interfered there because, to include, we find the one quite adequate or something like that.
Like that, yeah. So, yeah. But Gene Roddenberry was most definitely an atheist, and Star Trek is basically a Marxist utopia, where they fight like the evil capitalists of the Ferengi, and the Klingons are the Russians and things like that, and so I don't watch it because I agree with Gene Roddenberry's underlying philosophy. I watch it because at its best...
I totally thought that's why you watched it.
Right, exactly. No, I watch it because Star Trek is great sci-fi when it's at its best. It like we talked about last week when Caleb and I talked about Contact, and when we talked about Arrival, great sci-fi isn't about the science fiction elements. It uses the science fiction elements as a backdrop to investigate things about humanity. And Star Trek at its best did that. And there are a lot of great episodes to that effect on TNG also. And, I don't always agree with their positions either. They had an episode where, where they encountered an androgynous species. And so, that was kind of like a gay rights, trans rights episode. I don't necessarily agree with all that, but even the episodes I disagree with, I still enjoy the philosophical discussions that the episodes often have in them.
Yeah, you remember when Data designed his own offspring?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like we may have to plan a Star Trek and theology episode.
Yeah,
that would be an entire podcast in and of itself.
Yeah,
it would never end.
I actually have 2 books. One is about Star Trek and philosophy, and another is called The Ethics of Star Trek. And The Ethics of Star Trek, I could get it if you're curious about who wrote it, but it was actually written by a Christian, by a Christian philosopher. I don't remember offhand who wrote it, but I've got it on my bookshelf. But I was actually really surprised to discover that the guy who wrote it is actually a Christian philosopher. So yeah.
So
Christians don't like Star Trek.
This Star Trek show, can I catch up on this in like a half hour or something?
Oh yeah, there we go. Star Trek and philosophy. Yep, I've got that one. Well, I mean, there are a lot of really great episodes, and so I don't know if you could really get the fullness of it in just watching one episode, but there's a lot of really good ones.
Look at all this nerd bonding we've got going on here.
Yeah, it's
a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge Star Trek nut. I first became aware of Star Trek when TNG was just ending its ending its 5th season, and it ended on a cliffhanger. And I was young at that point. I had no idea what cliffhangers were. I was like, hey, this says to be continued. Why aren't you continuing next week? Well, turns out I had to wait until the next season to see the conclusion. But
I was on the edge of my seat for that one. That was the Borg one, right?
No, that was Time Zero. That was Time Zero, the one where they went back and met Samuel Clemens. And
okay.
The Borg episode was the end of the 3rd season. The best of both worlds. Yeah, one of their best episodes, cliffhanger. But yeah, this one was there were, it kind of a more goofy premise. There were aliens in the past that were basically killing homeless people by taking some kind of thing that they needed for their bodies, and they happened to find Data's head in an excavation on Earth that was hundreds of years old. And so they encountered this planet where these aliens were actually going back in time, and so the Enterprise crew had to go back and investigate, find out why they found Data's head and things like that. It was one of their more science fiction-y premises, but TNG has a lot of really great character-driven episodes too.
All right, and with that sales pitch for Star Trek.
Oh, but yeah, I'd totally be down if you want to do a Star Trek episode on the podcast. So.
Yeah, and y'all do that. I'll just sit here like, yeah, not at all. I'm not a Trekkie, I'm afraid.
Oh.
But y'all can catch me up.
Okay.
Now I could go with Isaac here. He may really like one of our next planned shows. Let's see. Oh, it's not showing up the whole thing here. Oh, I put up the wrong one. Never mind. So Star Trek is good. I prefer watching horror films. We would get along.
Horror films.
Yeah,
we should do that. We should review a horror film. Did you think it'd be a good idea?
Yeah.
You do not follow us at all, do you?
Yes, I know of one. It's called The Vivitch, I think.
Ooh, sounds good.
Yeah, the Vivitch episode will be coming up probably in the next weekend or two. Hey, and Isaac seems to have enjoyed the conversation tonight. We've certainly enjoyed it as well.
Yeah.
So, and Isaac, I mentioned to you in the chat about a possible call-in. We could set up an episode and just have a discussion. We wouldn't have a debate with you. We don't have to set it up in debate format. I just enjoy talking with people, and Joel's always looking for more research on his deconversion studies. So
Yes, and I do not shun people who don't watch Star Trek, so don't worry.
yeah, I haven't been kicked off yet. So but yeah, so we can talk afterwards, Isaac. It might be interesting to set up a call in and have you call into the show, and we could just have a conversation. So thanks for chatting with us tonight and diving into this stuff. All right, guys. Well, I think we're at a pretty good stopping point here. But I do want to continue some of this conversation with Isaac. He seems like a respectful person. He's certainly not in here name calling like some people have, and I can really, really appreciate that, regardless of our differences.
That he followed Maverick Christian in through the door.
Maybe he has. All right. So, any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anybody wanna pitch their channels?
Yes, Maverick Christian YouTube channel. I have that. Been working on a video that utilizes this cool camera, my new camera. If you're Patreon, you can see me unbox it. If unboxing is something that people care about anymore.
Oh, you do the unboxing thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's so early 2020.
Yeah, next we're going to see Maverick Christian reacts to.
Do you do this thing where you cut everything open and it's all cake?
I didn't know that existed. No.
Look up everything's cake.
Yeah, I saw someone post that GIF the other day.
No, it's a YouTube thing. Look it up sometime.
Oh, okay. Because there, I mean, I don't know if it's the same thing or if it's similar, but there's a GIF about, excuse me, this guy who's just like watching this YouTube video, and yeah, it's like, or not like, I don't know if it's YouTube video or something, but there's like this roll of toilet paper, and then they cut into it like it's cake, and then he's like all in awe of watching people cut into these things like this cake, and then suddenly like everything on him is cake, like his pants is cake, and everything like that. So that was on a GIF.
But you have to understand the context that joke is being made in. It's this big thing on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Yeah.
All right. So Isaac Anderson says, last question. What do you think on a short film being on betting on infinity? That does not short film to me.
Is that the name of a short film?
Betting on Infinity? That's got to be a film at least as long as a Jackson cut of Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's see.
Well, if that's a short film, I've never seen it.
There is a video out on YouTube called "Betting on Infinity," and it deals with Pascal's wager. It looks like so. I haven't seen it personally, so that's something we could watch, or if it's good enough, maybe even consider it for the show. Isaac's expanded on it here too. It's made by an artist I spoke of earlier, the Ramen Trees. I'm curious because I haven't seen any reviews or discussions by Christians on it.
Oh, it's Theremin Trees. But I mean, I think Pascal's wager works only on like a very narrow case anyway. Like if you have a tiebreaker between atheism and Christianity, then you go with Christianity. I mean, Pascal's wager doesn't really have that much apologetics import as far as convincing you what is in fact true. It's more of a practical reason to pursue Christianity.
Well, it's interesting. If I were to ever deconvert, I would most likely become an absurdist because it's the only worldview that makes sense to me outside of theism. And if it's a choice between absurdism and theism, Pascal's wager makes a lot of sense because, why not?
Yeah, and for me, Pascal's wager played kind of that role in things, in that it is one step of things, but you really have to expand it to have it really make sense, I think, in terms of when you're comparing major worldviews. all together and see, how do these add up? So, which worldviews offer consequences for not believing in them, and you narrow it down, and most worldviews actually come out as just be a good person, do good things. You're going to progress in the afterlife in some way. If you narrow it down, you've really got Islam and Christianity that offer, out of the major world religions, that offer significantly different in terms of, if you don't believe this, you're going to have a negative consequence. So then you can compare worldviews. And I think if you do that, Pascal's wager makes a little bit more sense, but you really have to take different worldviews and look at them and compare.
Yeah, Ravi Zacharias had a different view on Pascal's wager in so far as he said it's more the question of, if you have lived life as a Christian and Christianity is untrue, you have still received a maximum amount of fulfillment in your life. There is nothing to regret about living a Christian life if it's untrue, because you've lived a life wherein you've had purpose and you've had drive and you've had fulfillment and so on and so forth. And if atheism is in fact the case, that Christianity has done nothing bad for you and many things good for you.
All right. Anybody else have a pitch before we go? Clinton, Joel, where can people find you guys?
Well, yeah, I'm affiliated with Life Training Institute, which is a pro-life educational organization. You can find that at www.prolifetraining.com. I write for the blog there, and I've also been published on the Secular Pro-Life blog. You can find some of my articles there at blog.secularprolife.org. So there's primarily where you can find me. You can also find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, but I don't use my Twitter so much because 140 characters doesn't lend itself well to having good conversations. So I usually just use it to promote articles that I write. I don't really use it for communication. So Facebook is really your best bet. And you can also email me too. My official LTI email is clinton@prolifetraining.com. So, you can always email me there too. Those are the various places you can find me.
So I'm most active now on my Facebook page, switching sides, and on my Twitter feed, sides switching, because most of what I'm doing right now is my research and posting on that. But I also have a website, joelfurchess.com, and I have all the other things. Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and you name it.
Cool. And I can be found at Question Christianity on Facebook or YouTube. In addition, the new thing for both Question Christianity as well as The Mentionables is over on Parler. So go check that out. It's a Twitter-esque app, but so far it's been all right. So check out Parler and follow our page over there.
I don't know. I hear that Parler doesn't farm my data and sell it off to marketers, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, if that's something you're really looking for, Twitter would be the way to go. So before we wrap up here, I'll close with this last comment by Isaac. I simply think that life is beautiful. I don't know if there is a God. I simply use my reasoning consistently to decide, as all I am aware is there is no deity that is controlling my mind.
I agree.
I could be wrong. We both could. It really depends. We have to look at potential gains and losses and decide if it's worth it.
Yeah, and
that's some good. Yeah, that's some good comments to finish on.
Yeah, he said, count the cost. Make sure following me is worth it to you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, the last pitch is, of course, for the Mentionables page. Be sure to subscribe. Hit the notification bell while you're here on YouTube. Check us out on Facebook and Parler, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next time. Should have had, the ending streamed up. I got so distracted by all this conversation. I forgot to even queue up our end screen. So
Goodbye.
now,
goodbye, everyone. Followed by awkward silence.
yeah. So now I'm just talking randomly until I can load us up. So good night.
Stop being so interesting, everyone.